Remember this?
The bottom line is this. I've been unfaithful to my wife. I developed a relationship with what started as a dear, dear friend from Argentina. It began very innocently, as I suspect many of these things do, but here recently, over this last year, it developed into something much more than that. I think that is the bottom line of God's law. It is not a moral, rigid list of do's and don'ts just for the heck of do's and don'ts. It is indeed to protect us from ourselves. And the biggest self of self is indeed self.
The biggest self of self is indeed self. Who could argue? That was Republican Governor Mark Sanford of South Carolina admitting that he had been cheating on his wife. That was 2 years ago this month, in fact. The governor admitting to the people of South Carolina and to the world that he had traveled to Argentina to visit his mistress, even though he'd told everybody that he was off hiking the Appalachian Trail. The day after that press conference, the day after sitting Republican Governor Mark Sanford of South Carolina admitted to not only having this affair, but lying about it, Republicans across the country, of course, were asked what they thought about all of this. What should happen to Mark Sanford? Should Mark Sanford resign because of all this? Among the Republicans asked that question was the number 2 Republican in the U.S. House of Representatives at the time, a gentleman you might have heard of named Eric Cantor. Here's how he responded.
As far as his remaining governor, Brian, it's up to the people of South Carolina, and that will play out. But listen, Governor Sanford apologized yesterday. We ought to be, really dedicating our thoughts and prayers to his family right now, going through a difficult time.
We should be praying for his family right now. Whether he stays or he goes is up to the people of South Carolina. It's not for me to say. One of the things that was so amazing about the Mark Sanford I Had an Affair press conference was that it came just about a week after a similar but also quite shocking I Had an Affair press conference from this guy.
Last year, I had an affair. I violated the vows of my marriage. If there was ever anything that I could take back in my life, this would be it.
That, of course, was Republican Senator John Ensign of Nevada, acknowledging that he, too, had been cheating on his wife. He had been stripping the wife of one of his Senate aides, who, in addition to being his mistress, was also working for his campaign. 2 high-profile Republican politicians busted for adultery in the span of about a week. Again, Eric Cantor, one of the top-ranking Republicans in the entire country, was asked to respond. He had responded to Mark Sanford, and then he had to respond to John Ensign. What should happen to these guys?
Look, I mean, is anyone happy to see all that have happened? No. I mean, it's not good. But listen, we have our thoughts with their families and they themselves.
But if you're going to talk the talk, why not walk the walk and say, you know what, they should step down?
Well, listen, I mean, again, I say in the instance of the people in South Carolina and Nevada, it is up to them. I mean, those are the elected individuals by those states.
Our thoughts are with their families, but really it's up to the people of South Carolina and Nevada to decide. Me, Eric Cantor, it is not for me to say. So to be clear, you have Governor Mark Sanford admitting that he is guilty of lying and adultery and hypocrisy on the issue of sexual morality because he had previously campaigned on his superior family values and other people having family values that weren't as good. And you have Senator John Ensign, lying, adultery, hypocrisy on the issue of sexual morality. He, you might recall, had previously called for Bill Clinton to resign because of President Clinton's affair. Possible abuse of power in his office, a complicated cover-up ensnaring other U.S. senators, orchestrating a potentially illegal lobbying scheme as part of the cover-up that ended up implicating his own Senate staff to the point where his own chief of staff had to seek immunity from prosecution. That's the John Ensign scandal. But in both of those cases, in both Sanford and Ensign, the number 2 House Republican, Eric Cantor, says, essentially, pray for their families. Let their constituents decide their fate. Who am I to say? Fast forward to today. The day after Democratic Congressman Anthony Weiner of New York acknowledges his own indiscretions. His indiscretions essentially amount to sending compromising pictures of himself to women on the internet and engaging in sexually explicit chats with women online and lying to cover it up. Yes, he definitely lied. As far as we know, there was no actual physical adultery, nor is there political hypocrisy here. Anthony Weiner has never campaigned on the basis of his superior family values and other people having bad ones. He's never demanded anybody resign for having had an affair or for having some sort of online indiscretion. So, Congressman Cantor, what should happen to Anthony Weiner? What should happen to Congressman Anthony Weiner? Should we pray for his family? Is this not for us to say?
I think it is up to Congressman Weiner and his constituents to make that decision. I don't condone his activity. I think he should resign.
I think he should resign. Sure, his constituents should get a say, but me, Eric Cantor, I think he should go right now. What is the difference between Anthony Weiner and these other scandals? Other than the fact that when you stack them up next to each other, his, frankly, has less bad things you can say about it than Governor Sanford's scandal or Senator Enson's scandal. What's the difference between Anthony Weiner and these other two guys? It's okay if you're a Republican. Anthony Weiner, it turns out, committed the gravest sin of all, not a Republican. And this stuff is apparently okay if you are a Republican, if you are asking the Republican Party about it. Remember this guy, Republican Senator David Vitter of Louisiana? In 2007, David Vitter was busted for having solicited prostitutes through the D.C. Madam. The D.C. Madam was running a high-end prostitution ring in Washington, D.C. Her phone number list got out, and David Vitter was identified by Hustler magazine, oh yeah, as being a client of the D.C. Madam. His phone number appeared on her list 5 separate times. David Vitter was a member of the House of Representatives at the time. 2 of the phone calls from the D.C. Madam occurred during House votes. Really? David Vitter, like Mark Sanford and like John Ensign, addressed the media. He acknowledged that, yes, he, too, had been cheating on his wife. And this wasn't just cheating. Soliciting a prostitute is illegal, even in Louisiana. Illegal in Louisiana and in Washington, D.C. But Senator Vitter, who had previously called on Bill Clinton to resign for his affair, David Vitter decided that he was forgiven. Decided to stay in office, and we all had the image of the look on his wife's face burned into our minds forever. David Vitter decided that he himself was forgiven. He also was apparently forgiven by his Republican colleagues, allowed to stay in office by his Republican colleagues then in the Senate. And so today, right now, David Vitter remains a Republican senator from the great state of Louisiana. Here's one of his websites, which we accessed today. He proudly already displaying big pictures of his wife and his kids, still proclaiming his great family values. Given Republican Congressman Eric Cantor's demand today that Anthony Weiner resign, we asked Congressman Cantor's office if he is now making the same request of Republican Senator David Vitter. Senator Vitter, this guy, who again potentially committed a crime by soliciting prostitutes. The response from from Eric Cantor's office, quote, Eric isn't the majority leader of the U.S. Senate. David who? That's a matter for the Senate, not the House. Gotta go. When we reminded them that Mr. Cantor had previously spoken publicly about the John Ensign scandal, even though John Ensign is also a member of the Senate, so pretty please, what does he think about Senator David Vitter? We were told by Mr. Cantor's office, quote, Senator Vitter won re-election. David Vitter, that's already been decided. He was re-elected. Anthony Weiner, on the other hand, he must resign. And why is that? Because it is really only okay if you are a Republican. It wasn't just Eric Cantor calling for Anthony Weiner's resignation today. Incredibly, it was also the chairman of the Republican Party, Reince Priebus. Mr. Priebus put out a statement today saying, quote, Congressman Weiner's actions and deception are unacceptable and he should resign. Mr. Priebus appeared on my colleague Martin Bashir's show here on MSNBC today, and he ended up running headlong into the it's okay if you're a Republican problem. Watch this.
The man is a creep, and he's a member of the United States Congress, and he's admitted to flat-out lying, not only to the American people multiple times, but to multiple reporters, and even coming back to hallways after he knew what the truth was,
can I
and
ask
then lied
you
again.
Is John Ensign a creep as well?
Well, you know, listen, I mean, this is about
can you
here
just
and
answer
now.
that? You,
I mean, John Ensign resigned. I mean, I'm not going to get into all the details.
Was he a creep prior to his resignation?
I have no idea about whether or not he was a creep or not, but the man resigned and he did the honorable thing. And the reality is that I think Anthony Weiner should do the same.
I have no idea if John Ensign was a creep. Should be noted that John Ensign only, Mr. Priebus says, did the honorable thing and resigned after it was clear that he was going to have to testify in front of the Senate Ethics Committee, after it was clear that the Ethics Committee had enough dirt on him to probably recommend his expulsion from the Senate. He didn't resign in shame. Oh, I've done wrong. He resigned about 4 feet in front of the pitchforks coming after him from the Senate he was part of. He only resigned because he was about to get thrown out. He didn't resign in shame. Is that the honorable thing? Mr. Priebus, who has presided over a Republican Party that counted John Ensign and David Vitter as its members in the Senate, never called for either of these guys to resign. He says he's still not sure if John Ensign is a creep. But Anthony Weiner must quit. It's okay if you're a Republican. As we speak, the House Republican Campaign Committee is demanding that any House Democrat who received any campaign donations from Anthony Weiner must return those donations immediately because it's tainted money. Now might be an appropriate time to note that the Republican Senate Campaign Committee was chaired by a man named John Ensign, while Mr. Ensign was stooping his Senate staffer's wife. Everything the Republican Senate Campaign Committee did was under John Ensign's direction in 2008. He even got the son of his mistress a job at the Republican Senate Campaign Committee while the affair was happening. Are these Republicans who received not just money but strategic advice and coordination from John Ensign's Senate Campaign Committee while he was having this affair that led to this cover-up, that led to this ethics scandal, that may lead to criminal charges, that may lead to him going to jail? Are these senators? These guys all tainted by John Ensign's taint? Whether or not you think that, certainly no Republican has argued that, even as they now argue that Anthony Weiner's money taints everyone it touches. It is okay if you are a Republican. It is okay if you think that Anthony Weiner should resign, frankly. It is okay if you think that everyone who's gotten money from Anthony Weiner is themselves now tainted somehow by the fact that he had sexual relationships online with people that weren't physical but were online, and maybe people should give that money back so they don't want to be associated with something like that. It's okay. There are not a lot of Democrats rushing to Anthony Weiner's defense right now, certainly if you're looking to his friends and colleagues in politics to ascertain an appropriate level of response here. But I would venture the guess here that you can't both demand that Anthony Weiner resign because he's a creep if you never said beep about John Ensign. You just can't. You can't look kindly upon David Vitter in the United States Senate while demanding that Anthony Weiner resign. You, sir, you're fine. Anthony Weiner, gotta go. Really? Seriously? Really? You cannot demand that people return donations from Anthony Weiner when the whole Senate Republican Campaign Committee was headed up by John Ensign while the affair and the cover-up were happening, and you didn't say beep about it. Either you actually care about this stuff or you do not. This is not to say that Anthony Weiner didn't do anything bad here. This show was one of the places where he lied in response to a direct question from me about what he was doing. But if you are so outraged by that lie or by anything else that he did, that you are demanding that he must resign and that other people be shamed by any association with him that is not repudiated, you ought to at least try to fake that same concern about other politicians who have done the same thing and worse but happen to be in a different party. I know that it's okay if you're a Republican is actually what the rule is. That's actually how things operate in the Beltway. But for the sake of national shame, at least try to fake it. For the sake of the shame of the nation and my belief that we might still have some, please try to fake it. Please try to fake it. Please try to fake it about this guy. Come on. Former chairman of the Republican Party, Michael Steele, joins us next.